Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at how to run and store flows locally between Prefect 1.0 and Prefect 2.0. All right, so you'll notice I have a bunch of terminals going on here, but that's because I'm going to run my agent on top left here. I'm going to do some CLI commands related to Prefect 1 in the top right. I'm going to run my agent for 2.0 in the bottom left, and I'm going to do some CLI commands for Prefect 2 in the bottom right. And so I already have my conda environment set up so that I can use the correct version of Prefect in each case. All right, so let's look at the code. We have one flow in Prefect 1.0. It's just doing some very basic tasks. For completeness, it's generating some random numbers. It's going to run some conditional tasks based on whether or not this length of random numbers is odd. But anyways, the important part is these imports up here. We are using the local run config, which is going to mean that we're going to run flow on my computer, as opposed to some remote location like Kubernetes pods. Also, we have this storage import, and we're going to store this flow on my machine. All right, so let's get into it. How do we use these things? If you're familiar with Prefect, then this should be no surprise. We are going to pass these run config and storage settings as quarks into this flow object. We can go ahead and verify that things are making sense, and let's run our Prefect 1.0 version, not the 2.0 version, and we should see that we have a flow that does work. In this particular case, our length was even because isOdd was false. Alrighty, the storage and run configs really come into play when we start thinking about registrations. So let's go ahead and register this flow, which will again save it our computer, which is the location that Prefect will go and grab it if it ever needs to be run. We can register this flow by calling Prefect register, passing in the path of our file, and then specifying a project. If we want to productionalize this, we'd want to run an agent so that it can listen for if we ever want to run a flow based on schedule or some GraphQL API call. So let's go ahead and start an agent, again, using this Prefect 1.0 environment. So we can do Prefect agent local start. That's going to start an agent that's listening for flows that have labels pad to local, because that's just the name of my machine. We can go ahead and run our flow by saying Prefect run and then specify the name. And note, this is not quite the same thing as just running the Python file. We are actually hitting the API and telling Prefect to go and grab this flow from local storage. It says, hey, we've created a flow run. We can verify that this is true by popping over to the UI. We can go to flows and look for the one that we just registered. This would be control flow. And we should see that we just had a run of this flow occur. And look at that, 3:48 p.m. It is now 3:49. Yep, this is it. We can check this out if we want and look that we did in fact run our flow. And it happened to be even in this case. So again, this ran locally and was pulled from my machine because it was stored locally. Okay, so how do we do this in Prefect 2.0? Let's hop over to the 2.0 code, and we'll see that we have very similar flow. It's doing the same exact tasks. We have a couple different things. We don't need the filter task anymore. We also don't need to specify the storage here. What we can do is we can create a deployment YAML file that we will apply to our cloud workspace. Let's see how we can do that. We have a flow defined here, and we can use the prefect deployment build command, and then specify where to look for this flow, and it will build the file that we will apply for us. So we're going to say prefect deployment build, and we're going to specify where the file, the literal Python file is, and then the primary flow function, I believe it's called in the docs, but it's the name of this Python function, which happens to be decorated with a flow decorator. And then we're going to give this deployment a name. I'll call it my first deployment. And if we go ahead and run that, it should say, I found a flow in the file that you specified, and it went ahead and created a deployment.yaml for me. I can check that out if I want. I could edit the parameters or tags. In this case, I don't really care about that. What I care about is applying this deployment YAML so that I can call it and then show how we can use the agent to listen for instances of this deployment. Let's go ahead and do prefect deployment, not build this time, but let's apply the YAML that we just created. So let's apply that YAML. Successfully loaded my first deployment, and we've created a deployment based on this YAML. And now what we can do is we can verify we do have a work queue we will send jobs to, and then we can start an agent that's going to listen for work in that work queue. We have a work queue right here called migration, and that's the one I'll use. So we can do prefect agent start, and then specify the ID, which happens to be my shell history. So we are now starting an agent that's listening for work that I send to this work queue. And this queue currently doesn't have any tags, which means that any deployment that creates flow runs will get sent to this work queue, and this agent will pick them up. That means that if I run prefect deployment run, and I want to run my control flow, the name of the flow followed by the name of the deployment, we should see that this agent is going to pick it up. And look at that. We have an agent that has just picked up our 2.0 flow. And in both cases, we are running this code on our machine, and it is stored on our machine.